think you could literally just be like,
Yeah,
"Do you want
because
to be my friend?" And then you just like go and play outside or something.
yeah,
It's
because
like,
there were no expectations, right? Like I guess it's just like one fire truck that you both like, and y'all just share that truck, and like that's it. Like y'all friends for life now.
Welcome back to the In Good Company podcast. One thing that can be particularly challenging as we get older is meeting new people and making new friends. This topic is relevant to me because my partner and I recently moved to a new city for work. And between work and life commitments, it can be hard to make new connections, or even really know where to start. My guests today are Rob Velzeboer and Kelvin Fernandez. Rob and Kelvin are PhD students studying at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And both of these guys have made some big international moves in their lives. I want to talk to them about their experiences with establishing new connections and see if they've got any tips for me during this transition. Welcome to the podcast, guys. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for
thanks
having
for
us.
having us, man.
So what we're going to talk about today is kind of some of our common experiences that we've had with finding the right crew, meeting new people, making those connections in our lives, and kind of creating social circles, especially as we've kind of moved around the world and started our lives in different places. But before we jump into that, I want to get to know you guys a little bit better. I know you're both doing your PhDs right now at varying stages. So maybe you can start off and just tell us a little bit about your research. So Kelvin, we'll start with you. What are you working on?
Yeah, right. Thanks, Paul. So for my PhD research, which I'll be studying hopefully in the fall, I'll be looking at Canadian-based racialized crime and suicidality. So specifically, I'm trying to understand like the connections between minority stress, masculinities, and like suicidality within this population, and just really trying to understand like their strengths and challenges in dealing with suicidality. That's like the overarching idea of like what my work will be about when I start.
Yeah, interesting. And is that qualitative? Or are you going to be doing interviews with guys?
Yes, so it will be individual photo voice interviews with men.
Yeah, so similar methodology to the study that we did for this project. So Rob, what about you? What's your research on?
Yeah, so I study men's meat consumption and masculinity. And I contacted John, our supervisor, John Olive, with the question, will these kinds of masculine associations that we have with meat, around like protein and strength and these kinds of things, still play into these emerging alternative meats as well? And will these appeal to men or not on that basis? So yeah, I think that's just my general interest. How do guys look at these things? How do guys look at meat in general? There's not a whole lot of work on it. So that's what I'm doing here.
Yeah, it's interesting how gender kind of intersects with our diet as well, right? And the kinds of foods we eat. And we see it a lot on social media. This big kind of meat eating, raw meat eating, even as kind of a demonstration of masculinity. I think it's quite interesting.
I think in pretty strong ways. It's like that whole carnivore thing is becoming pretty big now, I've noticed. I think women, on the other hand, are like way more targeted with things like dieting and like, supplements and pills for their health and stuff. And like for guys, it's mostly just protein.
So I always think it's interesting. We're all doing research on men's health. And it's something that we can reflect on kind of the influence of that on our own lives and our own lived experiences. And we all have something in common. We have all made big moves around the world where we've kind of picked up our lives and transplanted ourselves somewhere else. So I want to talk today about those experiences because I think it's quite common for a lot of people. Maybe it's not quite as big as some of the moves that you guys have made where you've kind of immigrated from a completely different country and culture. But I think a lot of people have experiences where they've upped and moved to a new town, or they've even moved to a new community, started a new job, and there's some challenges with that, right? You kind of lose your existing connections, and now you've got to make new friends, you've got to meet new people, and that's not necessarily something that we get a lot of practice doing since the schoolyard when we are young kids. So let's just get a bit of context, I think, and maybe you guys can tell me a bit about your history, how you guys came to be here in Vancouver at UBC today. And Rob, I'll throw this one to you to start.
Sure. Yeah. So I actually grew up on the Dutch countryside for about 16 years. And I think my parents always had this kind of dream to go to North America. And it was definitely the US first, and it kind of shifted to Canada at some point. Actually, we moved to Kelowna first. So Kelowna is like a sort of medium-sized city, but very, very different from Europe in terms of how social life works, how like transport works. It's a really big thing. And from there, yeah, I did my bachelor's there. I took my master's back in London. I kind of want to move back to Europe, and I was there for a bit. And then COVID happened, the pandemic came. Came back to Canada again because it was a much better place, I think, to be during the pandemic than Europe was, even though maybe some people disagree. And yeah, then I started looking for a PhD, and I realized that being in Vancouver and working with John will be a really good option for me.
Yeah, very interesting. So, did you move from Kelowna to Vancouver, or you moved from Europe back to Vancouver?
No, so it was Kelowna to Vancouver. So I basically moved from Kelowna first, that's where I did my undergrad, to London for my master's.
Yeah.
And then COVID the pandemic, I came back to Kelowna, it's where my parents live, because my parents
Okay.
moved here. And then, yeah, I started working there in like a clinical research job. And at some point, I realized UBC is actually a really good option to do my PhD at. So then I came to Vancouver about 8 months ago,
Yeah.
7 months ago.
Okay. So, relatively recently that you've landed and kind of establishing some roots there.
Definitely, yeah. I don't think I've really established roots yet, but we're working on it.
Working on it. All right. And what about you, Calvin?
So I grew up as a racial, religious, and also as a sexual minority in Malaysia, and it's an amazing country to live in. But like the work that I'm doing right now, it's shaped by like my experiences as a racial and like sexual minority, as a racialized gay man. So I think like that's really one of the big factors that really influenced me to want to study this population. And so the reason why I couldn't do this back home is because of the structural challenges around queer research. Like I want to take on a strengths-based approach to like doing queer research, which is not very easy to do in a society that's predominantly conservative. So I guess like the reason or like how I ended up here was that I did an undergrad in like biomedicine, very clinical, very technical. And then I did my master's in medical education. And then after that, like I really wanted to do this work. So I started reaching out to like researchers all over the world who were interested or like who did this kind of work. And then I came across John, which, as we all know, is a renowned expert in like men's health, and he has really used masculinities as a framework to like shape a lot of the work that he does. And so, yeah, I interacted, like, I engaged, I reached out to him, and we had a conversation, and he was happy to support this research that I want to do. And so one thing led to another, and I'm now here under John's fellowship to do this work. So I guess that's how I
Yeah.
decided. That's how I finally left Asia, like, and like now I'm here in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting because we've all grown up in different cultures and communities. Rob, you had your first 16 years in the Netherlands. Calvin, you grew up in Malaysia. And myself, I grew up in Canada. And so I'm always interested because a lot of guys talk about how those friends that they establish when they're kids are the ones that they kind of hang on to their entire lives, right? They have these childhood friends and they don't really step outside of those circles. So I'm curious what your guys' experience have been growing up in those different countries. Did you have kind of big friend groups and everyone kind of this collegiate group, maybe through sport or something like that? Or were you the type of guy that had kind of one or two close friends that you rely on? And have you connected and stayed close to those people over time? Calvin, we'll start with you.
Like for me, I didn't grow up in the capital. I spent most of my life in this really small beachside town on the east coast of Peninsular Malaysia. So in terms of the friend groups that I had, like if I were to describe it in a way, I would say like I was more of like a floating friend. Like I knew a lot of people. I had a lot of people who were friends. I guess we were friends, but I was never really close with anyone. It's those kind of things where you would have a party and you have like 50 people coming to your place, but you don't really know the 50 people. They're all just your friends. And they are my friends. It's just that I can't really think of like any sort of like personal, intimate relationship that I might have had with a lot of them actually. So yeah, I think like that's mostly how it's been like for me, like growing up. It's just having like a group of like 10, 15 people that I'm usually acquainted with, but none of them were really, I would say, close friends. And I think that was just basically all throughout my high school and
Mhm.
until like I decided to like go to university. And I think that's where most of my friendships became a bit more intimate and personal. But that also meant that I had lesser friends, like less amount friends.
Yeah, interesting. I like that term you used of floating friend. It's almost as if you were kind of part of a few different social circles, and you knew a lot of people, but you didn't necessarily feel like you had really close connections to any of them. Rob, was that a similar experience for you, or did you have a couple of close buddies that you stuck with?
For sure, yeah, but I think mine is quite different because, and I can never quite disentangle like what part of this is Dutch, what part of it is like being in the countryside, like living close to villages. But the place that I grew up, looking back now, was extremely social, and that we grew up on the countryside, so you kind of like knew your neighboring boys, and we just like play soccer together, like play outside. But then going to primary school, like I think these communities were small enough such that almost everyone just knew everyone. Like you remember like biking to school, and if someone would bike past you, you'd always just like wave and say hello, and like people would greet each other in the streets. Like this is like how this normally went. For me, it was actually quite a shock moving to the city for the first time. And I remember taking one of my countryside friends up to the city one time, like Amsterdam, when we were 17 or something. He'd never really been. And I remember his response was, how bizarre is it that people here don't actually like say hello to you, like look at you, like everybody just like walks past each other. So it was quite a shift, I think. And I think most of my childhood, and especially high school, was just very social, and that I had close friends for sure, like guys that I can like drink with and go to the pub with and stuff. But there will be almost like several groups. Like there was like one sort of like central town, and like three smaller towns surrounding it, and you kind of just knew people everywhere, and it felt like one big network. This is probably also a high school thing. I imagine if I would go back today, it definitely wouldn't be the same. But very, very well connected, I think.
Yeah, could I just add to that as well? In Malaysia, it's a very collectivist society. So even if I said like I wasn't very close to my friends, it's not in the same way that you would describe that here in like Canadian context, which I think is very individualistic. Even when I say I'm not close, like, I know we would still be able to have communal activities together. Like, we'd still go and play badminton after school on Fridays, and like we'll still hang out at each other's houses every night. I mean, like, not every night, but like when we go over, like, their parents are always there, like feeding us food and stuff like that. So like if I would say we were not close, it's within Malaysian context, because it's very different if you were to use that to describe Canada, at least based on my observations. That brings, like, not being close friends brings on like a whole new meaning.
Mm-hmm. I feel it too. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And I mean, you guys bring up some really good points that it's hard to disentangle whether it's personal experience, whether it's the culture, whether it's the location, being rural or in a big city. There's so many different things that are kind of impacting our individual and interpersonal experiences. But Rob, something you said resonated with me around in the big city, walking past people and not acknowledging each other. Kelowna is generally a small enough town that you may not know the person that you're passing on the sidewalk, but you would acknowledge basically everyone. If you're walking down the path with your dog, you'd kind of give them a nod that they exist. And that's one of the biggest things that I noticed when we first moved to Sydney in Australia is that there's too many people. You can't acknowledge everybody. And so what ends up happening is that you just ignore everybody. You kind of, yes, you're surrounded by people, but you're kind of existing in your own little bubble. So yeah, I'm very interested in that kind of cultural aspect as well, of how social connections kind of look different in different communities. So maybe, Calvin, can you expand on that a little bit in Malaysian culture, what that kind of communal aspect looks like that still wasn't kind of serving that desire to have those close connections that you were looking for?
Like, one way I can put this is like people might not know you on a personal level, but I guess they're always ready to help you in the event of an emergency, or if you need help, basically, even if they don't know who you are, or like even if they're not close to you, they're still happy to give you what you need, or like, help you out in different ways. So like, for example, when I was in school, I didn't get lunch money. I would have friends who they might not know me personally, but they will be happy to like to share their food with me, that kind of thing, and I think it's very much rooted in like that cultural value that we have in Malaysia, where we're constantly looking out for each other. And another example that I would probably give is, as a gay person, obviously in Malaysia, it's not really something that's approved in society. But I know for a fact that, even if someone might disagree with the fact, or they might not agree with the fact that I'm gay, like I know if I were to be in an emergency, if I were to need help, like I know for a fact that I can rely on them to help me out. Like they would bring me to a hospital or they would help me get the things that I need.
Mm.
You know, in Vancouver at least, I just see like that really isn't a thing here, or at least based on my observations, it isn't. So I think when I first moved to Canada, like having to adapt to like how it's like here was a bit challenging in the beginning, especially when I was trying to build friendships and like, you know, trying to like sort of adapt.
Yeah. So how have your friendships changed as you've gotten older? Has your perspective changed, and has the reality of those relationships changed too?
They did. I mean, eventually, like I think, especially as like my own worldviews and like my own values and principles changed over time, I think those friendships changed as well. You know, the ways in which I was able to connect with people also changed, especially because like for me at least, like, you know, for me to be able to like build friendships with people, like we need to have some degree of like shared values and principles. Like we don't have to agree on every single thing. We don't have to like the same things, but I think we need to be able to share similar values. So as I grew up and like, you know, as I evolved as a person, I think that became a lot more important. So yeah, naturally like the social connections that I had changed as well. Not always for the better, but like, you know, that's just part of life, I guess.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Rob? How have your social connections kind of changed as you've gotten older? You said you came from a very kind of communal, small town vibe where everybody knew each other. Did that change as you got older and moved to different countries?
Yeah, I've had a lot of different experiences. I am also thinking like what you're saying about like the sort of identity and values thing. Like I think that's also just an age effect, right? Like that's what we're saying. Like I think that the big things at play are like you change in age, which really changed the way you relate to friends. There's like a change in time. Like I think in 2010 things were different than nowadays, right? Like social media and such have changed things quite a lot. And then there's a cultural context and like the rural city things. I feel like there's a bunch of things going on. But I do remember like when I started traveling, I was 16 and my brother lived in Sydney, Australia, actually. And I went there to study English. And coming there, because you're in class with all these students who came to travel there and want to learn English, it's like everybody is new. So it's really easy to make friends, right? Everybody wants to get to know someone. We're all there for a short time, so we're just trying to have a good time. Those kinds of connections, those short-term kind of travel connections, are quite different from establishing yourself somewhere. And I found coming to Canada, Kelowna specifically, I found it quite difficult to form more meaningful friendships. Like in university, you definitely meet people and you'd see people across different class and such, but to kind of build up a cohort, I think one of the easier places for me to socialize was always a boxing gym
Mm.
because I boxed for most of my life. And so it's just a kind of like a space where everyone meets almost every night, like the guys who train. And you're kind of forced to interact with each other and you train each other. It's like a physical sort of bonding activity too. And you know that someone's going to be there every night. So you kind of get to know the same people over time. It's almost like an inevitable sort of friendship that you form there. Whereas I guess universities can be really big. You know, some classes, especially undergrad, like 150, 200 people. You may like poke the guy next to you and be like, hey, like you want to like sit after class, like go over something. But it takes a bit more time to, I think, really develop, you know, like a solid friendship. So that's kind of been like my go-to thing, I think, mostly. It's just like find spaces where people meet up regularly. And especially if you like a certain activity, it's easy to kind of bond over that shared interest. I think the fact that it's a space where you have people meet up there at a specific time frame all the time. You don't have to like schedule it in any way. You just make it part of your, you know, your weekly routine. And I think that yeah, that's really helped me.
Mm-hmm. Are there any individuals that come to mind that have been kind of particularly impactful in your life? You were talking the other day about a coach that had quite a big impact on you.
Right. Yeah, boxing coach. Obviously a bit older than I am, but definitely a very good connection to have, especially in a smaller city like Kelowna, because he knows a lot of people for like something happens with my car or something. Like it's like handy as like a networking kind of connection, but also just in terms of yeah, having someone you bond with over something that we both care a lot about, like the sport of boxing. And so I think he's been, yeah, a really big part of my Canadian journey. And it's been almost 10 years here now. And he was the first guy that I got to know. And we're still in touch now. I'm actually going back on April 20th to Kelowna to do commentary on the annual fight that we're
Okay.
producing. Yeah, this is pretty cool. That's a big one.
Yeah, I love the intergenerational interaction as well. I think there's a lot of value that we can get from that, especially as guys, kind of handing down that knowledge that's gained to the next generation. And I don't think it happens nearly enough. So I guess sticking with that relationship, how did that form? Was it just natural that you guys were spending time together and you became closer, or did one of you kind of take an active role in turning it from an acquaintance to a friendship?
I think it did take time, but not that much. Like we just, especially when I was younger, I had such a strong interest in boxing. And the first thing I did when I came to Kelowna was I need to find a gym. Like I need to find a place that I can compete out of and like have a coach with. And so Jeff happened to be the guy that that ended up going to. There was 3 gyms there, and I ended up going to his. And pretty much immediately, it was just a really easygoing kind of vibe. Like we got on well with each other, and then especially on fight nights, like if you have to go somewhere in Canada, because it's such a large country, you got to imagine like in Europe or in the Netherlands at least, like when you go compete for like soccer or something, football, as we like to call it, it's maybe 20, 30 minutes away. Like 30 minutes is a long drive, right? Here in Canada, if you compete out of Kelowna, you usually go to Vancouver, which is 4 hours, or you go to the border of Alberta sometimes, like Fernie was our first fight, which was like 9-hour drive or something. So you go on a 9-hour drive together with your coach, and it's the 2 of you, or like maybe 3 or 4 guys. You go to inevitably bond over this, and at the same time, it's such a like an adrenaline rush sort of experience if you're going out somewhere to compete, to fight. I think those were big moments to develop almost like brotherhood kind of feeling with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. So I was talking to Dr. Simon Rice the other day about, some of the tips that he would give to guys for making new connections. And one of his strategies was find something you love to do and do it. And you will make the connections with the people that have similar interests to you. So I think especially for guys, that's a really important avenue of, finding a hobby or an activity that you enjoy doing and finding the community of people that also enjoy doing that. Because a lot of times our connections don't occur from bumping into people and having a conversation and striking up friendship. It comes from doing things together, right? It's at least it's a lubricant. It's a social lubricant to, sitting side by side in the car. You've got the sport you can talk about, all these sorts of things that can help foster that friendship. So Kelvin, I'm curious, what has your experience been moving to Canada? What strategies have you used to kind of make new connections, meet new people?
Making friends in Canada is really expensive.
Interesting.
Yes, because there's not a lot to do here. Like you've connected with someone, you want to foster that friendship. I think there's not a lot of avenues in which you can do that for free. So you need to go and like go out for food, and you need to go out and do like some kind of stuff together, and that usually costs a lot of money. Like the food prices are extremely expensive. So to be able to do that every other day is not easy. And obviously you need to keep meeting people if you want to like foster that. Like, I'll be honest, as a gay guy, I mean, there's also like concerns about how do I approach friendships with other men, because, I think that's something that I want as a guy myself, without that being seen as a sexual thing.
Mm-hmm.
So on Bumble, which is a dating app, it's a dating app, but there is a feature where you get to actually meet other people as friends. Like, so it's like a friends feature on Bumble. And I've been using that quite a bit because I wasn't interested in meeting people to date. I was interested in like meeting people to be friends with.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it's been really helpful because I was able to connect with other people, other guys who were also interested in making friends. And some of them were like queer. And I met a few guys who were straight, and like now we're friends, and like we go out. In fact, like I have one of them that we're planning a hike together in a couple of weeks. So yeah, so that's one of the things that I did, which is really nice and really interesting, and it was really helpful when I first moved here. The other thing that I tried doing was to attend so they're not really support group sessions, but they're sort of like social circles. If you're like a racialized man, for example, you could attend the social circle and meet other racialized men who might want to like meet other racialized men to be friends with. There's like an organization that does that here. They've got a session for like trans men specifically, or trans and gender diverse people. And they've got like a separate session for like gay men who are 50 years old and above. And then they have got like one for like racialized queer men. So I've explored like these avenues, and they've been really helpful to like connect with people. But yeah, other than that, I've just been able to like meet people through like classes, usual regular contact that I have in school, because I'm in school most of the time. So I think that's like a really good place to be able to meet people as well.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting that, you both clearly value those social connections and have made kind of an active effort to go out and make those. So I guess I'm curious, what sort of qualities do you look for in a new buddy? Like, you know, what are your green lights and kind of red lights for someone that you're like, oh yeah, you know, we align and it might be something that I'd be interested in, you know, getting to know you a bit more. Because Kelvin, you said something earlier that I think is really interesting, where if we're looking for a relationship, a partner, right? Those qualities, we probably want them to align a little better. I mean, I guess you hear the saying of like opposites attract, but the criteria for someone that you're going to get in a relationship with is probably stricter than that of a friendship. And I guess from my own experience, you don't need to be perfectly aligned in every way, shape, and form. You know, having some common characteristics like you found in those groups, or common interests, like you would through sport or boxing or something like that, I think are helpful. But with friends, I think it's interesting that you can kind of have a diverse range of friends that maybe come from different backgrounds and experiences and stuff, and still, you know, learn a lot from them going forward. So what do you guys look for in a friend? What qualities?
I think like you're right. You know, I don't need to like the same things that my friends like. That's pretty much how it's been for me growing up. I had a lot of guy friends, you know, and they love playing soccer. I mean, at least we call it football back home, but I'm just gonna use soccer here because it's a Canadian context.
Europeans get offended by this, man.
Yeah, I mean, they love football. And so like I don't like football, but I played football anyway because, you know, that was an opportunity to connect and like be with my friends, you know, and I didn't have a problem with that. I wasn't good at it, but like, you know, I tried anyway. So I did a lot of sports with my friends, my guy friends. So like I love tennis. So like there would be one day like I would like get everyone to go to the tennis court with me. And this would be like 7 different people on one tennis court, but that's all we could afford. We don't always have to like the same things. I think compromise is really important. But I would be friends with someone who shares similar values. We can disagree on like whether coffee is better than tea or not, but we can't like I can't be friends with someone who feels like one group of people deserve less rights than the other. You know? So it's the values and like the principles and that kind of stuff that I think is really important. You know, and as a gay guy myself, like, you know, if someone wants to play football, but then like if he's homophobic, you know, then I can't be friends with him.
Sure.
You know? So I guess that would be a red flag. Other than that, like I don't really have strict criteria. Like, you know, I have friends where I'm mostly an introvert, and I have friends who are like massive extroverts. And if I can't keep up, I'll just tell them I can't keep up, like go ahead. So yeah, it's just those things. I think it's not a strict criteria really. I think it's just having shared values and like having like similar moral conscience. Like I think that's important. I probably wouldn't be able to be friends with someone who embodies like toxic masculinity, or someone who is misogynistic or homophobic. Like that's like those are all red flags to me, and I don't think we would align in any way.
What about you, Rob?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about this. I don't really think that I look for much. Like I was thinking about red flags, and I can't think of much in that sense, other than someone who's obviously just, I don't know, dangerous or something, doesn't respect you. I do find it interesting to have friends with very different sets of values and interests and passions. Like it's interesting for me to get to know other people who think differently about stuff. And I think being in a boxing gym, for example, but also being involved with policy people and like health, you know, researchers, and with vegans a lot too, right? And the meat consumption thing, like that's some people that I interact with, and at the same time hunters at my boxing gym, for example. Like there's so many different kinds of views about why they believe and what they do. And I find with my coach, for example, it's just interesting to kind of get his very old school masculinity. And he often elaborates on that too, right? Like the 60s and 70s, these sorts of images of the drinking. Okay, I don't know if I can say this. The drinking, fucking, and fighting, man. Like that's the thing that he often emphasized. That was like the Sean Connery or something, you know, that he wouldn't date someone if they, I think there's like a line like that in James Bond. He wouldn't be with another woman if she's not single. Like you're not my type if you're not single or something.
Right.
Or if you're not my type if you are single.
Right.
Like,
right.
It's just sort of like badassery idea, and obviously completely wrong. But interesting for me, I think, to just get to know and understand where different people come from. I obviously have a very strong view myself on like the use of animals and veganism and these things. Yeah, I find it very interesting, compelling to get to know people with other views. And there is a very obvious line with that. Like you're talking about things like identity, where if someone just doesn't appreciate certain people based on something that is outside of control or something, it would be like, yeah, I can't hang with a person like that. But otherwise, I think I like the diversity, my friends.
No, I think it's very interesting, and it's an approach that I try to take, I think, when I'm meeting new people in general, is just being broadly curious to get to know who they are and what they're passionate about and what makes them tick. And Kelvin, I completely agree that any sort of discrimination and hate is unacceptable. But, a lot of those like strong, hyper masculine, however you want to describe it, sometimes aren't the person's choice. They're a product of an environment, or, they're trying to emulate, as you say, the Sean Connerys that they see on TV. And so, I often find it interesting just to probe, finding out what people are passionate about, whether you're super interested in sport or cars or, whatever it is. Drawing that passion out of people, I think, is particularly interesting because I can get interested about a topic hearing how excited you are about it, right? So I think just that kind of interpersonal curiosity can be really valuable in making new relationships. And that's, certainly was the case for me moving to a more rural town in Australia, was I actually made a really close friend. We started training for a half marathon together, but it kind of developed into a really close friendship that I value a lot, and one that I'm probably going to, I'll definitely maintain for the rest of my life. But that definitely looks different as you move away and you have to find kind of new ways of connecting with each other. So, do you guys have any specific strategies for moving from an acquaintance to a friendship? Calvin, I haven't gone on anything like Bumble Connect or anything like that, but I imagine, it probably links people together based on some interests or commonalities or something like that and starts a conversation. How do you go from getting to know somebody to maybe meeting them in person for the first time? I imagine just like dating, that's probably an awkward leap to make. What's been your experience with that?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I usually just ask like, like really basic questions about like, what do they do and like, what are they into and like what they enjoy doing. Like I would say like it's just the same as when I went into like primary school when I was like 7, 8 years old. When you meet someone for the first time, you're just trying to get to know the other person. All we have to do is just find one thing that we both probably like enjoy or like. So I guess like one of the guys that I'm friends with right now, like we both like Japanese food. Like so I was like, oh let's go have ramen. And we did that. And then like we just hung out after that. So it's just like I guess it's just finding like one thing. And then like from there like you can then propose like a meetup. Let's go do this. If we both like hiking, let's go hike somewhere. So it's just really anything that's random that you both could like just agree on, I think. The whole idea is to not have a lot of expectations going into like these kind of exchanges. I guess you're just going in with the idea that, I just want to meet someone else. Like I just want to meet like a new friend, and so you just do that. And I guess like it's the same like with what Rob and like what you've been speaking about. Like it could be sports, it could be literally anything. Like my roommate that I'm like the guy that I'm roommates with right now, like we just like tennis. So like we just play tennis together and like that's it. And I think this applies to like, different groups of men. Yeah, I think like that's been really how it is for me. And it's very low cost, low energy, very easy to maintain, very, very easy to like, And if like things don't work out after that, like if you feel like y'all don't feel each other's vibes after that, like just
Ghost each other.
I mean, don't ghost, but like I mean, I don't know, like just like just go your separate ways. I mean, it's really chill. I think that's basically how I'd say. Like it's just chill. Just go into something with a new friend. I think that's how you build that friendship.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's really good advice around not having super high expectations for every interaction that, I really hope this works out, or I don't want to mess this up. Right. I think that can often be a big barrier as well. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves, but you're absolutely right that, it takes multiple tries. Not everybody's going to be a perfect fit. And as we talked about before, you don't necessarily have to be a perfect fit, right? There's value in just interacting and those little interactions here and there. Not everything needs to blossom into a bromance that you have forever, right? There's value in just getting out there and connecting. What are your thoughts on that, Rob?
Yeah, I'm thinking more about like the different kinds of friendships that you have. Like it's almost like I wouldn't call it tiers of friendship or something. Like it's weird to think about it in that way, but I have my childhood buddies, for example. There's three of them that I really keep in touch with for all my life, and we still call somewhat regularly. And I don't think those connections are ever gonna go anywhere. And I think otherwise, like it's this question too of like maintaining relationships. Like you find probably as you get older, and what I've been having the last couple of years is if you do a PhD and you work multiple jobs and you have a girlfriend, for example, like there's not a whole lot of extra time outside of that. There's a lot of things you have to do in your daily life. And so that's kind of why I think earlier I went to the point of trying to set up a sort of like regular activity that you do. And then from there, if I just connect someone with someone, well, I can just go, hey, do you want to go on a hike on the weekend or something? Because it's something that we tend to do. And then, they can join me and my girlfriend or we do something together that way. But I think usually it's just that kind of thing. Like it's very simple. Hey, we connect here over a meal. Like I stay here at Green College, which is like a residential college. I have dinner together with people. I haven't been involved just because I've been busy and I kind of live in with my girlfriend right now. But yeah, if you connect well with someone, you can just go, hey, like on the weekend, you want to tag along for a hike. And it could just be like a weekly kind of activity that you do together. And same thing, like I said, with a boxing or a gym or something. And I find that a lot easier than having these sorts of one-on-one friendships where every time you have to go like, oh, like, what are you doing like Wednesday afternoon or like Thursday night? And then one person goes, oh, actually, like I got to like study for an exam that day. And like, oh, but that day, this thing is due. And then you got to like constantly like figure out where in your schedule you have a gap that kind of like fits both. And at some point it gets really tiring. And I find that too over time because I've moved around a lot throughout the years. There's very few friendships that kind of last throughout time in that way when it's just sort of like one-on-one things. The gym stuff has stuck around a lot more because she's kind of involved with that group and people know you as part of that group. So that's what I found. It's hard to manage, I think, one-on-one friendships when there's a lot of them. So I kind of look for that, having an activity that you both go to, and then if you want to build on that, you can just do activities together on the weekend or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an important point around different types of friendships. There's friends that you do things with. And I guess for guys, I think the challenge is, we talk about authenticity and someone that we can open up to and, share some of the challenges as well as the highs. And so maybe that is a more select bunch. A lot of guys in the study talked about having a desire for stronger connections that they could open up to, and how, sometimes those conversations fell to their female friends or their partners, but they wished, some of their guy friends would also have some of those conversations with them as well. Does that resonate with you guys at all in any way?
I do think I have that. Like, I do think female friends are usually those that I speak more about emotions with, back and forth, like between both of us. Guys don't open up about it as much. I think it's almost like you have like kind of like banter friends, activity friends, your serious friends, especially like here with a PhD, people that you talk about research with and such. And then maybe like sort of like long-term or more emotional, deeper friendships, which all serve some kind of different purpose. It's not like you use the friendship to just fill some gap, but it kind of naturally, I think, shapes in that way. It's not like I'm forcing like, hey, this has to be a banter, or this has to be this kind of friendship. It's just more things come about that way. And I think I'm pretty lucky in still having childhood friendships, that I can rely on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like I'm from a beachside town. So one of the things that we used to do until like before I left was we would go to the beach, like 6 guys, and like we will each buy like a bottle of beer each. We'll go to the beach and we'll sit in like a very dark corner of the beach and just like chill and like talk about life and talk about like relationships and like what everyone's up to. For a lot of the guy friends that I was with, like they really needed that space. I never really had like a problem connecting on an emotional level. Even now, like one of my closest friends, he's a guy, and like we've been able to like talk and like about our feelings and like connect. I would say like my friends and I, like the ones that I'm surrounded with, like we're very comfortable with our masculinity. We're very comfortable with just being vulnerable. Like we don't see that as a threat to like our identities. And I don't know, maybe it's because we grew up together, like we knew each other as kids, and so I guess that whole process made it a lot easier to just be vulnerable with each other. Like the first few people that I came out to were like my guy friends from high school. I mean, yeah. So, like not knowing what the reaction was going to be like, but I felt so comfortable and like safe and like, and they were really positive and like really chill about it. Like I remember the one time I came out to a guy, like he was super chill with it. Like we went to Thailand and like he was happy to like, because I had never been into a gay club before. So like he's straight and like he's like, let's go and check out a gay club together. Like, and that's just how chill that has been. So I don't know, like I think I've had like really good experiences connecting with guys and like, and he's very, very straight. So I think he was just so comfortable, like he just didn't see it as a threat at all. And that was helpful for me because I wasn't going to go into a gay club by myself. But yeah, I think that's really how it's been like for me.
I can also add that like, I think a part of it too for myself in that sense, because I don't think I've had too much of an issue connecting with guys on that level either, if they're open to it. A lot of guys aren't, but I think it's also the fact that because you're in research, and especially if it's like men's health research like we're doing here, there's probably a bit more of an idea of like, oh, this guy may kind of know, this field or this issue more, and so there's a sort of interest almost in hearing what you have to say about it. So that probably helps, I think, in that sense. Like, I think that's what I've had, with most of my relationships throughout time is the idea that, because you're like a researcher or something, like you should.
Yeah. I mean, if I could just say, like, I think generally for me, like one of the things that I can think of in terms of advice is that the connections and the friendships that you have, like they're not supposed to make you feel bad about yourself. If the connection or like the friendships that you have make you feel a lot more worse or make you feel bad, then I don't think that's the connection that you want. And obviously, like, there are a lot of different ways in which you can feel good being in a friendship with someone. So yeah, I guess like that's just really how I've approached like my process of like building connections with other men is, if I feel like this connection that I have is just making me feel a lot more worse, whether as a guy or as a person in academia or as a gay person or as like as a racial minority, whatever it is, like, if it makes me feel a lot more worse as a person, it makes me feel bad, then I know that's not the connection that I want. But if you feel good, like, then go ahead, like, whatever the friendship might look like, go ahead and like enjoy that. And I think that's really helpful. But if it's making you feel bad, then that is not it, I think.
Yeah. We always talk about the idea of finding someone that fills your cup up. And, Kelvin, I completely relate that I feel like I'm more of an introvert as well. And so oftentimes making the effort to set up a hangout or, organize something or, find time with a group of guys can feel like a lot of work. But oftentimes, when I reflect back on the actual time that I spent with them, especially when it's, good buddies, close friends, or even just a good hangout, right? With someone that I don't know that well, that maybe I got to know their passion about something a little bit more, that it does serve to re-energize you a little bit. You shouldn't leave it and be like, oh man, I'm exhausted after that, right? It's so much work or, something like that. You should be energized from it and kind of be rejuvenated. Any final thoughts before I let you guys go? Any stories or experiences that you think would be really valuable to share?
I just think something of interest that I was thinking about is that we've talked a lot about doing activities together and the kind of like shared values, passions, all these things. And I think like into your 20s, perhaps, like it's important to kind of form some sort of identity, it seems to me, like some sort of like, this is the passion, this is the thing that I like doing or that I'm going after, and you'll meet people, within that sort of frame of what you're doing. And I think that's a big thing to think about.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because, we've talked a lot about childhood friends being those close friends that we've maintained, but just because you may not have close childhood friends doesn't mean you're shit out of luck with making new connections. So yeah, I think that's a really important point.
I think I would just like to add, and I don't know if this is applicable to everyone, but I feel like that whole childlike approach to making friends can actually be somewhat beneficial for men. Because I guess like as adults, there's all this expectation, there's all this things that you think about when you're approaching someone, when you want to go up and talk to someone. But I feel like if you take like a more childlike approach to like making friends, I think that can be really helpful, because like I think if you think about like if we sort of like reflect back on like how we meet friends as kids, like, you know, it was literally like not much work. You just go up and you just bond over something. I don't know, you could
I
bond
was
over.
just trying to think back about it as well. I think you could literally just be like,
Yeah,
do you
because
want to be my friend? And then you just like go and play outside or something.
yeah,
It's
because
like,
there were no expectations, right? Like you
uh-huh.
just, I guess it's just like one fire truck that you both like, and y'all just share that truck, and like that's it. Like y'all friends for life now. So I think without infantilizing like the whole process, I just want to say like, you know, that approach can be really helpful, because low expectations, not a lot of work needed. You just have to share and bond over one thing, and it has been really helpful because I have like some really meaningful connections that I've kept for like years now just by doing that one thing. So maybe that's something that's worth considering.
I agree. No, it's really funny because my mom used to tell a story that I moved to a new school in grade 3, and she walked me to school because it was just up the street, and she was worried that I wouldn't, you know, make new friends, or, you know, just worried about that process. And I guess there was another little boy that came up before school even started, and he said, "Do you like to run?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Let's go." And we just ran off. And I guess my mom said to the other parent, she was like, "Well, that was easier than I thought it would be," you know? And, you know, I kind of reflect on that to that most recent relationship that I talked about earlier, where, you know, it was essentially the same thing. We came up to each other and the guy was like, "Do you like to run? Do you want to train for a half marathon? All right, let's do it." And, you know, so you're absolutely right. It's you take that kind of childhood approach.
Exactly. And I think it can be really helpful. I mean, like just based on my observations and like based on like people's stories, I think it can be really helpful.
Yeah, that's a cool anecdote, man. I like that.
You just made me think of it. Well, I think there's some fantastic examples in there that you guys have shared. And I think, you know, we talk about that idea of kind of seeing other guys and seeing other guys' relationships and as something that is difficult to do. So I think it's these kinds of conversations where we just share our own personal experiences, as diverse as they have been, given our backgrounds. I think there's a lot more similarities than differences in terms of men's experiences and also in terms of what they're looking for. And so I hope that kind of goes to show and maybe give some confidence to anybody out there that is going through a transition period or is just looking to make some stronger, more authentic connections in their lives. I think there's a lot of value in having talks like this.
I agree. I really enjoy this.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, guys. And I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Sounds good.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Paul. Have a good one.
Be sure to check out the In Good Company website to learn more about men's social connection and peer support. Have a burning question or an idea for a future episode? We'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line at mens.health@ubc.ca. Thanks for listening.